Just pull up my notes. Okay, with the help of Hashem, we are picking up, like I said, from chapter 14. And we are seeing that from the moment Shaul takes the throne, there is a lot of action, a lot of battles. He first fought this one named Nachash, and last time we saw it that his son Yonatan, Shaul was the king, his son's name was Yonatan, and he incited the Plishtim, who was the main enemy of the Jews at the time, who lived very close and in their midst, and even had commissioners in their midst. Yonatan, the son of Shaul, killed the Philistine commissioner, which incited the entire Philistine army and the wrath of the Philistines, and there they sent armies to attack the Jewish people. And it's unclear, as we said, it's unclear whether Shaul instructed his son Yonatan to do this or not. The Radak took both sides. He wasn't sure. The verse doesn't say that Shaul told him to do it. Yonatan did it on his own. And as we will see further, Yonatan is not afraid and not bashful of doing the thing that he thinks is right, regardless of whether or not the king tells him to do it. Erev Tov, Rab Cohen. Nice to see you, Ron. So what happens after that is Shaul waits for Shmuel to come. He wants to bring a sacrifice before going to war, so he waits for 7 days like he was instructed. But on the morning of the 7th, he sees the Jewish army is dispersing. They said, we can't wait around any longer. The enemy is approaching, and he wants to go out to war. So he decides on his own, against the instruction of the prophet, he decides to bring the sacrifice on his own. And sure enough, immediately, Shmuel shows up, and he says, you shouldn't have done that. I told you to wait for me to bring the sacrifice. You didn't wait. And Shaul starts blaming, I wanted to go fight the enemy, and I saw the enemy was approaching. But all the excuses, albeit good ones and urgent ones, they did not change the verdict. Shmuel informs Shaul that because of that mistake, that he brought the sacrifice without waiting for the prophet, because of that mistake, he will lose the kingship. He will not be the king forever, meaning him and his lineage will not hold on to the throne. Rather, it will go away to someone else. And that was the punishment of Shaul. Then, interestingly enough, there's no recording of any emotional reactions from Shaul. He goes after Shmuel to Givat Binyamin. This is all just a review from last week. He goes to Givat Binyamin, and in the meantime, he only has 600 soldiers left. So now you have a gigantic, absolutely mammoth, a Philistine army approaching the Jewish people. And there's only 600 Jewish soldiers, and they don't even have proper weapons. Maybe some slingshots and bows and arrows, but they don't have any metal because all the smiths belonged to the Philistines. The Plishtim didn't allow them to have blacksmiths. So they were really, really outnumbered and outpowered. Yeah, Moshe.
It's worth noting that a sling used as a weapon is very different from the modern toy slingshot.
It's more of the swinging around.
Yeah, that used as a weapon is a formidable weapon. It's not metal. It's not a sword. It's not a bow and arrow. But it's not a toy.
Yeah. So don't make little of slings, and you should not play with them if you're not qualified. I agree they're dangerous, right? But the Navi emphasizes they didn't have metal because that's also an essential part of the weaponry of an army, and they lacked it. The only two swords in the nation were Shaul's and Yonatan's. They somehow had their own swords. Rashi says it was a miracle, but nobody else had any metal weapons. So it shows you how down the Jews were, meaning on the surface, this looked like a hopeless battle. And despite that, we saw that Yonatan once again, this time it was for sure not with the instruction of his father, Yonatan goes up into enemy territory, just him and his arms bearer, the Nosei Kelav, and he goes to scout out the enemy, how they're doing, and he decides, you know what, this is an opportune time to attack. And what do you know it? Him and his arms bearer, they strike down 20 Plishtim on the spot. A miraculous victory over that small unit that they faced. And this causes a tremendous tumult and uproar and fear and panic in the Plishti camp. The Plishtim don't know what hit them. They don't know how big of an army just attacked. 20 of their soldiers are just dead. And aside from the natural fear and confusion, Hashem compounds it and amplifies it, and the whole camp is in complete chaos. And that's where we're going to pick up tonight. The Plishtim are going nuts. This is verse number 15. This chapter Yudalet, Perik Yudalet, Pasuk Tedvav, 14, Pasuk 15. There was fear, trembling in the camp, in the field, and in all the Plishti nation. Everyone was afraid, but the earth shook. I don't know if that means literal, like it was shaking from all of the running back and forth, or is like the feeling was that the earth was shaking. Or it could be that haaretz here doesn't refer to the land, but all of the people in the land. As we'll see, sometimes the land refers to all the inhabitants. So everyone was shaking.
The cowboy and Indian movies, when they all start moving, the theater.
Yeah, the dust rose and the the drums start rumbling. But and it was the fear of God upon them, which sounds like it was also an element of God inspiring fear in their hearts rather than just the natural course of things. I see that there's a hand raised. Go ahead, Mr. Fox.
Yes, this whole thing with the metalsmiths.
Yeah.
Weren't there? There was a lot of metalsmithing going on in creating the ark, in creating the tabernacle, and
yes.
moving it and everything around. How did they lose those skills?
You have to appreciate that was a few centuries prior in the desert, at least over 100 years prior in the desert. And you'll say, okay, but they could pass on the skills. This is an insight that the Plishtim were so in charge and so on top of the Jews that they forbade the craft. Now, how long does it take to just stamp that out? If it's forbidden to be a blacksmith, all it takes is one generation and it's gone. Right, one generation, nobody can apprentice their father or the blacksmith down, and it's out of there. So you see that the Plishtim really had a strong hold over the Jews, and they forced them. If you want to do any servicing to your metal equipment, even if it's your farm tools, you have to come into Plishti territory to do it. So really, your question is just an indication of the fierce presence of the Plishtim. So here it is: the Plishtim are in an uproar. And now the camera zooms away from the battle of Yonatan and his arms bearer. It shifts back to the camp of Shaul with his 600 soldiers. It's like 600 minus 2 now. So Shaul says to his nation, this is Pasuk 16. The watchmen, or the sentries of Shaul see, they see everyone running around, and that the Plishti camp is having a meltdown. So Shaul wants to get to the bottom of this. He says, what's all this hubbub in the Plishti camp? Somebody must have done something over there. So he says, do a count, pigduna uru, survey our army and see, mi halach mimanu, who's not here? Maybe there's like a group of soldiers that went and attacked. So they do the search, and they find that Yonatan and his arms bearer are missing. Just Yonatan v'nosei chelav. Vayomer Shaul la'achia, hagisha aron ha'elohim. Ki haya aron ha'elokim bayom hahu b'nei Yisrael. So Shaul says to Achia the Kohen, bring the ark. Rashi and the Radak and the Mefarshim explain he's not asking for the actual ark, but rather the Urim v'Tumim, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. He's asking for the Kohen Gadol to ask of God through the Urim v'Tumim whether or not this is an opportune time to fight against the Plishtim or not, or to figure out how to proceed. He wanted to know how to proceed. But there's not even time for that. As the Pasuk says in 19, Vahi ad diber Shaul ala Kohen, v'he'amon asher b'machne Plishtim v'yelech haloch v'arav. As he's speaking to the Kohen to prepare the Urim v'Tumim, the chaos is growing, v'yelech haloch v'arav, and until it became very great. And Shaul said, and now interestingly, there's a pause in the middle of the verse. Even though it's still the same verse, there's actually a break in the text, there's a space. if you see it on your Hebrew side, if you have a double version, in the Hebrew
Right.
side, there's a break in the middle of pasuk 19, as if to say, Shaul. It's this. I don't know why it's there. It could be it's two different topics. One is talking about the chaos of the Plishti camp, and now it's shifting to the conversation with Shaul, or maybe there's a small lapse of time. But in any event, Shaul says, you know what? Cancel that request. Don't ask the Urim V'Tumim. Now is the time to fight. I see that they're in such a mode of desperation. Those Plishtim, they're so panicked and they're so in a mode of anarchy that this is the time to attack. And he makes the decision without asking the Urim V'Tumim, which is fine. He's the leader. He's allowed to do that. Vayza'ek Shaul v'chol ha'am asher ito. The word Vayza'ek means to cry out. In this case, it means that Shaul gathered the nation. And the reason it says Vayza'ek is because the way he gathered them was by crying out. It's a call for war. Everybody, now it's time. You can imagine him calling out, now is the time, now is the time. It was so urgent that mid-conversation with the Kohen, he realized we have to go now. Hashem is giving us a perfect opportunity to fight against the Plishtim. Now think about it. You recall there were tens and tens of thousands of Plishtim with chariots and fierce warriors, and only 600 Jewish soldiers. So they go out against the Plishtim, and they come to the lines of war. The Hinei is still verse 20, and behold, Haitah cherev ish bere'ehu, which means they observed that the sword of a man was against his fellow. The Plishtim were killing each other. They were so confused. They didn't know what was going on. People had just been dropping dead. They started killing each other. Mehuma gedula me'od, a very big chaos, a very big uproar. And now, again, we find an interesting expression. It says the Ivrim, the Hebrews, those that stood on the other side, Hayula Plishtim ketmol shel shomash ha'eluima b'machane saviv. V'gam hem aliyot im Yisrael. So the Radak explains what this means is, there were Hebrews, there were Jews that were actually living with the Plishtim for quite a while now. They had just surrendered themselves. They said, we can't live with this oppression. And they went over to the enemy side. Not that they were rebelling against the Jews or defecting. They just said, here, do with us what you want. And they had even joined the Plishti army. The Plishtim asked them to come out to war against the Jews. So they were a group of Hebrews, Jews, who were coming to fight against the Jews. But they were b'machane saviv. They were on the outskirts of the Plishti camp, because in their minds they said, when the fighting starts, we don't want to fight against our brethren, so we're going to just, stay off to the side. But now these Jews, when they saw the infighting amongst the Plishtim, they said, now is our chance. We can help our brothers, the Jews. So these Ivrim that had joined the enemy were now also fighting against the enemy. And they weren't afraid of getting caught because everyone was killing everyone. So it was fair game. The Plishtim were so confused they wouldn't notice that these Jews who were in their midst would be fighting against them. Just to give you a picture of the absolute chaos that Hashem had inflicted. And now people started to join in. They saw what a miracle was happening, and the army quickly grew in number. There were people who were hiding, you recall. They ran away when the Plishtim were approaching. They now came out of hiding. They heard that the Plishtim were running away, and they joined the army of Shaul. Vayad Biku, which is an interesting word, and they caught up to the lines of war, and they fought together with the Jews. So in verse 23, this is a conclusion. Vayosha Hashem bayom ahu et Yisrael v'hamilchama avra ad Beit Avin. And Hashem made a salvation, a great Yeshua on that day, and the war came to Beit Avin. What'd you say?
You said Pasuk 23?
Yeah, 23 in chapter 14 in Shmuel Aleph. It's Shmuel Aleph. Don't fall for the old Shmuel base trick. We're still in Shmuel 1.
Yeah.
So chapter 14, and now we're up to 24.
I thought we were ahead of that.
Here we are.
Okay.
So here's a very interesting episode. it says that the Jewish soldiers were nigas bayomahu. They felt they were very pressed on that day because vayoel Shaul ta'am lemor arura ish yochal lechem ad ha'erev. Shaul v'nikamti me'oivai. Shaul said he made an oath and a curse against anybody who would eat on that day. If Shaul made a prohibition, he made a cherem. The king, as the king, the Ramban explains, he had the ability to make a cherem, which is a ban, to forbid certain things. And Shaul forbade eating until the evening, until he says he gets revenge from his enemies. From my enemies, says Shaul. Until we take revenge from my enemies, no one may eat. Velo ta'am kol ha'am lachem. And the pasuk says they obeyed. Not only did they not eat, velo ta'am, they didn't even taste. There's a halachic difference between eating and tasting. Eating is when you chew the food and swallow it. Tasting is just to put it in your mouth and then spit it out. Just to have, like if you're tasting, like a chef would do, if he's just tasting the food, he doesn't have to swallow it. He just puts it in his mouth and spits it. One is actually allowed to do that on a fast day, if you know how to do it. In this case, they wanted to be very careful. They didn't even taste the food on a regular fast day, not a day like Yom Kippur. Right? Don't take any halachic advice from there. I'm just pointing out that even though it was a fast day, they would have been allowed to taste, and they didn't do that. Now, why did Shaul make a prohibition to eat? Why did he ban eating? And not only was there a ban, but there's also a curse attached to it. So the Radak and Rashi explain it's because he wanted to encourage urgency. He didn't want anybody to be distracted. Obviously, soldiers will get hungry, but he didn't want any break from the fighting. This was such an opportunity. And the Plishtim were so weak and defenseless that he wanted to take advantage of every moment of fighting. So he said, don't take any time to eat. It's forbidden to eat. Just keep fighting. Interestingly, the Malbim, I didn't see inside, but I did see the article quotes, and the Malbim says it's a spiritual merit. He wanted to decree a fast to have spiritual merit on their side, like fasting and repentance is the mode you go into war. That is interesting to suggest that a soldier would weaken their physical body to accrue spiritual merits. That's not so simple. Regardless of which definition you go with, of which explanation you go with, excuse me, if it becomes a case of pikuach nefesh, where it's a life and death situation and a soldier would die if he didn't eat, then it would be permissible to eat despite the ban. That's obvious. In this case, the soldiers weren't eating because they weren't going to die. It wasn't life-threatening, and therefore they obeyed the ban of Shaul as they must. Now they all came to a forest. This is Pasuk 25, Chafhei. And they find nectar on the face of the field. So the Hebrew word is dvash, which is usually translated as honey. And the Radak says this is bees' honey. There was like bees' hives, and honey was dripping from the beehives onto the ground. The Rashi quotes, interestingly, from Rabbi Natan HaYishmaeli, Rabbi Natan the Ishmaelite, which might mean he is a convert, an Arab convert, I'm not sure. But he quotes that this nectar was not honey, but rather it was sugar cane. Like the moisture was dripping from the sweet nectar was dripping from sugar cane onto the field. And now, since it's something very sweet, this is something that could revive the soldiers instantly. Just a little taste will do good for them. But nobody put their hand to his mouth. The entire nation feared Shaul. They obeyed the ban, and nobody had from the nectar. However, in Pasuk 27, V'Yonatan lo shama b'ashbi'a aviv eta'am. Yonatan, who was in a different area, as you can imagine, he had crossed over independently to enemy lines. So he was in a completely different section. So when Shaul made the announcement of the ban, Yonatan didn't hear. So he didn't know that it was forbidden to eat. So he took the tip of his staff, he dipped it into the honeycomb, whether it's the hive or just the puddle of sugarcane, and then he tasted the honey. Vata'orna einav, and light came to his eyes. Which simply means he had a taste of the honey, he ate some honey, and he was revived. Because after a day of fighting, he's completely exhausted, And that little taste of honey really rejuvenated him. When I initially read it, I thought perhaps maybe this was a euphemism for his eyes actually dimmed because of the ban of Shaul, because of the curse. It actually caused a negative impact on him. And I wanted to just check the Radak again.
I think it's very poetic.
Yeah. Yeah, the Radak does interpret it as dimming, but he says his eyes were dim before he ate the honey, and then they became light again. So, according to all commentaries that I could see on the page, it means that the light came to his eyes. Yeah, it is an interesting way of saying that he was rejuvenated and the light came to his eyes. But now somebody pipes up and they see Yonatan eating this honey, and a person said to him, "Don't you know your father made us take an oath? Cursed is the man who should eat bread today." Bread applies to all food, including the honey. And the nation is tired because of this oath. So here, this is interesting. You hear the person telling Yonatan about the oath, but he also throws in his own personal feelings about it. And the nation is tired. Don't you know that there's an oath? We shouldn't be doing this. But he also slipped in, and the result of that is we're all exhausted, which was like he wasn't so happy with it. Yonatan has a harsh reaction. Achar aviyah ta'aretz. My father has darkened the people. Again, we see here the word aretz referring to the people. Aretz usually means the land. It means the people of the land. My father has darkened the land. He's murkied. He's like murky water is a churim. He's made the people murky. Like when a person's fasting, sometimes your eyes go dim. I just had a little bit of honey and my eyes were brightened. Would you imagine if the entire army ate a little bit, wouldn't we be able to defeat so many more Plishtim? We would be able to have such a better battle if we just had a little bit to eat. My father, he was criticizing his father's decision. My father made a poor decision. He has dimmed the nation today by telling them not to eat. Shaul thought strategically it was better not to eat so you have more time to fight. Yonatan was saying, yeah, but you need energy. Let them have a bite to eat so that they could fight. So as soon as he hears about his father's prohibition, he's very upset about it. Or he doesn't say he's upset, but he critiques it. He says it's not a good idea. So now in Pasuk Lamed Aleph in 31, they struck down the Plishtim from Michmash, which is where they started until Ayalon. And the nation was extremely exhausted. The Abarbanel says this was actually a small distance. It's as if to indicate that Shaul's decision was a poor one. The nation was so exhausted they couldn't do more than this. They went from Michmash to Ayalon, and that was all they could do. They just ran out of energy. Eventually, now the day was ending, or now it was nighttime, so it was permissible to eat. So now the soldiers go down, and they take Tsonu Bakar, Bnei Bakar, they take sheep and cattle and the children of cattle, the calves, Vayishchatu arza, and they shecht it on the ground, Vayochal ha'am al adam, and they eat on the blood. I'll just translate the psukim for now. And it was told to Shaul, the nation is sinning, to eat on the blood. And Shaul turns to the soldiers and he said to them, Begadatem, you have committed treason, you've sinned. Bring me a stone. And everybody should bring me their animals, ushchatem bazeh, and you should shecht it like this and then eat it. And don't sin to God to eat the blood, to eat with the blood. So everybody brought their animals to Shaul on that night, and they shechted them there. And then Shaul built an altar, and he was the first to build an altar to Hashem. I just read ahead, now we're going to explain. So the nation did something wrong here. The soldiers finally get to eat at night. They go and they take the enemy's animals from the booty, and they shecht it, and it says that they eat on the blood. What does that mean? It was something that they shouldn't have done. as we see that they're chastised. They're called sinners for doing this. What did they do wrong? What does it mean to eat on the blood? So there are a few interpretations. Rashi actually says that their sin was when it says they took bakar ubnei bakar. They took cattle and young cattle. They violated the prohibition of otov et beno. It's forbidden to shecht an animal and its offspring in the same day, within the same day or night period. Yes? So after sunset, if you shecht the mother, you cannot shecht its child. You have to wait until dawn. I didn't do that. They were so hungry that they rushed, and they shechted them all in one day. That's Rashi's interpretation based on the psukim. But then he quotes Chazal. Chazal have two other interpretations. One is that they made these animals shlamim, peace offerings, because they wanted to praise Hashem for their victory. But the problem was they didn't wait for the blood to be sprinkled on the altar. And it's forbidden to eat a sacrifice before the blood is sprinkled. That's what it means. They ate on the blood. They ate too quickly. They didn't wait for the blood to be sprinkled. Okay, so either they violated shechting the mother and her child in one day, or they violated eating the sacrifice before the blood is sprinkled. And the third interpretation is the Radak, which I believe is also an opinion in Chazal, that he says that they shechted on the ground and they didn't allow the blood to flow out of the animal because they were in such a haste to eat. They were so hungry that they ended up eating blood, and it's forbidden to eat blood. That's why kosher meat is salted to extract the blood, and you have to let it drip out on a slope, etc. And in this case, they didn't do that. They were in such a rush that they shechted on the ground, and the blood pooled up, and they ended up eating the meat, which was infused with its own blood. Okay, so three different interpretations of what they did wrong. And the solution was Shaul brings a big stone, and he shechts the animal. He tells him to shecht it on there, because there you have a slope where the blood can drip down, according to the third interpretation. That stone also is the altar, so you could sprinkle the blood on it, and now you don't have to, and now you can eat after the blood is sprinkled. And according to Rashi, it doesn't really explain how he resolved it. That's what they did wrong. There's some details here. I don't know how deep we should go. Let me just pick out some of the highlights. Here, perhaps this in pasuk number 34, in Lamed Daled, Shaul says, "Bring me your animals, ushechatetem bazeh," which the English translation is, "Let each man bring me his ox and his sheep, and you shall slaughter them here and eat them." The Gemara says actually bazeh means zayin hey, the letter zayin hey, which means this, equal 12. Zayin is 7 and hey is 5. It equals 12. There are actually 12 checks you have to do to your knife before shechting with it. For a kosher slaughter knife, you have to check it 12 times. There's 3 angles. There's a directly across. Do I have my knife nearby? I don't. But you check it either directly on the edge, and then you check the right side, and you check the left side, right? Both sides and the thing. You go up and down. So that's 2, 4, 6. You can do that on your fingernail, and you're also supposed to do it on your flesh. Now, we've lost the ability to do it on our flesh. So in modern day shechita, you only check it on your fingernail. But so we do 6 checks instead of 12. But either way, the Gemara says that this gematria, Shaul was telling them to do the proper checking to their knife. The overarching idea here is the soldiers were starving. They were so hungry, and they were just acting extremely hasty. When it was finally time to eat, things were going wrong. Whether it was they weren't paying attention to whether the parents was shechted that day, but they didn't wait for the blood to be sprinkled, or they didn't wait for the blood to drip out, or they didn't check their knives properly. The problem was they were so hungry that they were over hasty. They were being too hasty.
He was worried that they were eating ever min achai if they don't shech the right way and the animal's still alive.
If you don't shech the right way, it's also ever min achai.
Yeah, as well.
Yeah. Where did you see that?
Yeah, over here in Otzar HaMidrashim, but I don't know who's the commentator. I've seen that.
Nice, thank you. Okay.
And
And
where,
the overarching idea is that they were too hasty, and perhaps it's again reflecting on this is the fault of Shaul, that he shouldn't have forbidden eating. We're going to see the results of what happened because of that. Yeah,
where
Mr.
did all
Franz.
these knives come from?
Interesting. Where did they get the metal knives? I guess it's from the booty. Now they got it from the enemy camp, and the
Okay.
enemy has lots of swords,
Okay.
so you could use the metal implement. The truth is, even if it's not metal, you can use stone or any sharp surface, any sharp object, as long as it's smooth and sharp. Yeah, you could theoretically use a reed, as long as it's smooth and sharp. We shafted only metal, but yeah.
You mentioned
Yeah, Moshe.
going back a minute. You mentioned the distance they traveled. Assuming those places are approximately where archaeologically they are believed to be, it's about 15 miles.
Michmash and Ayalon, 15 miles. All right, that's not. It's quite a day's work.
Not a small distance.
Not a small
That's,
distance.
that's
Yeah,
a that's a half a day walk.
yeah, very good. So the Barbanel says apparently that they could have done more, or that the way he's reading the psukim is they were very exhausted, which means they could have gone further and gotten rid of more Plishtim or gotten them further out of their territory, but they were too weak. Thank you for checking that. I was curious, actually. 15 miles from Michmash to Ayalon. Nice.
Depending where in Ayalon, because the Ayalon Valley is not small, could be up to 20 miles.
Yeah. But if you have
15 and
Kvish
20.
Echad with the number one highway, you can get there much quicker. So maybe they took the highway. You never know.
Actually, we know where the highway was then. The highway then was along the route of the current Arba Arba Shalosh.
Ah, very good. Very good. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. There's an interesting note here. I meant why are there so many interpretations of what they did wrong? One of the things that the Gemara debates is whether on a bama, you recall an individual altar, are you allowed to shecht at night? Generally, it's forbidden to bring sacrifices at night. You have to bring it during the daytime. But that's only in the Beit HaMikdash, or when the Mishkan is in Shiloh, or when the Mishkan is in Shiloh. But now, if you recall, we're in an intermediate phase where the Mishkan was in Nov, and it was permissible for individuals to set up their own altar, like we see over here, and to shecht. And we saw some exceptions already. We saw that a non-Kohen can do the service. Even a regular Israelite can do the service of a sacrifice on a private altar. And the Gemara here has a doubt, based on our psukim here and in other places, are you also allowed to shecht at night, like we see over here? Or are we forced to say that these are not sacrifices they were shechting, it was just regular shechita that was happening? That's part of the tension there. I'm just pointing that out. And because we're here, it's worth mentioning. Okay. Oh, but there's so much to do and so little time. Yeah, Ron. Yeah.
Where do they get the idea that it was for korbanot? That was at nighttime. It was because they were hungry. They were shechting for eating.
Yeah.
Why would they say korbanot?
So you see Rashi. He says Rashi refers to the Gemara in Zvachim. The Gemara in Zvachim says that they would want to bring shlamim after their victory in the war. You want to give thanks to Hashem, so you bring a korban shlamim, a peace offering, where part of it is burned on the altar, part of it goes to the individual. And that would also explain the prohibition of achila al hadam, eating on the blood, is they ate the sacrifice before the blood was sprinkled, and that's why Shaul sets up a mizbeach, because you see that the response of Shaul is to set up a mizbeach.
But
what did that have to do with?
No, we don't do sacrification at nighttime.
So the Gemara is saying since it's a bamat yachid, since it's a private altar, you're allowed to sacrifice at night, according to that shita, and that would make sense now. Why? Shaul sets up a mizbeach. Why does he set up an altar? What does it have to do with anything? So if we say that it's been talking about sacrifices the whole time, then it makes sense. So there's a lot. It's not, each interpretation will have its benefits. I thought we would get to the end of the chapter, but let's just finish off with verse number 36. It's a significant one. It says, "Vayiven Shaul mizbeach l'Hashem." Shaul builds a mizbeach to Hashem. Oto hechel livnot mizbeach l'Hashem. So the English translation that I have is, this was the first of the altars that he built to Hashem. it could be read, this was the first altar that was built to Hashem. So the Midrash picks up on that and it says, really? This is the first altar that was built to Hashem? Noach built an altar, Avram built an altar. Everyone's been building altars up until now. There have been many altars, and Moshe built an altar, the Jewish people built an altar. So it gives two interpretations. This is the first altar built by a melech, by a king. Until now, anyone who built a mizbeach, an altar, was a religious leader. Moshe Rabbeinu, Noach was a spiritual leader of his generation, and so on. That was like part of their identity. Shaul, we have to appreciate, is not the spiritual leader of the generation. That was Shmuel. Shaul is the king. It does not go without saying that he should be the one building an altar. And by him building an altar as the Jewish king, that is a tremendous statement, saying that although I am the king, or since I'm the king, I'm also a religious leader, and it's my job to build the altar. So him as a king is a unique status, and that's why he's called the first altar, meaning the first person with such a status, which is really like a political office, to build an altar. The second pshat is, the second explanation is that it's not the first altar that was built, it's that Shaul laid the first stone in the altar. He, the king, on his own, picked up a stone and he put down the first stone to build this altar, which is a sign of his humility and setting an example for the people to worship Hashem properly. Okay, we'll hold it here because we have Marv in a few minutes. And I look forward to picking up next week, God willing, with the consequences. Yonatan ended up eating and violating that oath. We're going to see the consequences next week. What happened to him, or what was supposed to happen to him? Is he going to die? Is he going to be put to death? Find out more. Same time, same place, God willing. All right. Have a wonderful night.
There we go.
Kol Tuv and good Shabbos.